Both the Tories and the Labour Party are telling us that they will pay for some new policies by a crackdown on tax avoidance. But this is a sham. Both parties have put forward the idea that they can raise £6 billion from reducing tax avoidance. It makes it sound like they're finding extra money for some new policies that they can talk about in the election campaign. What they're not pointing out is that this is a drop in the ocean. And moreover, the experts are saying that it's a tall order to even get this much money from a crackdown on tax avoidance. Let's look at the facts. First, we can see that UK government spending is around £1.2 trillion this year. £6 billion as a percentage of 1.2 trillion is nothing. It is half of 1%. A tiny increase in current spending. This is peanuts. Public services are stretched to the limit. Infrastructure is crumbling. We need much more radical action than this. Neither side will increase taxes. The Tories because they want to cut taxes to keep the rich happy, and Labour because they're terrified of saying that they'll increase taxes because they'll be accused of being radical left. Our politicians are really letting us down. Both parties are not being honest. It seems like it's more important for them to get into power than actually solve the problems of the country. This is such lame economic policy. It's passive, it's defensive, rather than bold and ambitious, which is what we really need. The truth is that if there was an easy, untapped source of revenue, why haven't the Tories already accessed this? They've been in charge for 14 years. Also, to be fair, HMRC are already doing this. It's not like we don't have tax inspectors that investigate people not paying taxes otherwise due. Now, it is possible that HMRC might not be doing this very efficiently, but we're not going to save the country's public services and infrastructure by trying to squeeze even more efficiency or productivity out of HMRC staff. So let's look at some more facts here. What are the biggest issues in terms of non-payment of tax? This is a little bit surprising. HMRC produces figures on the tax gap. This is HMRC's estimate of the amount of money that should be collected compared to the amount of money that HMRC actually receives. Interestingly, over the past 20 years or so, the amount of tax not collected, shown in the lower portion of this graph, has consistently been in the range of 30 to 35 billion pounds. The trend is relatively flat, which means that in real terms, the tax gap has actually been falling. If it's expressed as a percentage of total tax revenue, as shown in the upper half of the chart, it's been falling significantly. At face value, this would appear that HMRC have been successfully reducing the tax gap. It's surprising that the government hasn't already taken credit for this. This does seem like a positive development. Reducing the amount of tax fraud and tax avoidance is only a good thing. We can all agree on that. But it does raise questions about how much more scope there is for reducing the gap. It's interesting to note that in 2021-22, the gap was around £36 billion, yet neither party is claiming that they could close this level of gap by more than £6 billion. There is a limit, clearly, to how much tax avoidance can be prevented. Looking at who is not paying tax otherwise due, it is perhaps surprising that it's not multinationals, the wealthy, or criminals who are the biggest cause of the tax gap. In fact, small businesses account for more than half of these unpaid taxes. The green bar shows that their share has been growing significantly for the past 5 years, reaching 56% in financial year 2021-22. Multinationals, criminals and the wealthy account for much smaller proportions. HMRC also publishes data on the reasons why taxes due are not paid, and the biggest factor by far is failure to take reasonable care. Both parties have mentioned cracking down on tax avoidance. We can see that this accounts for only £1 billion. Cracking down on tax avoidance is not going to raise £6 billion as the political parties have been claiming. But overall, it would seem that there is scope for raising £6 billion this way. Maybe even getting a bit more of that £36 billion total tax gap. But here we run into another major problem. Like every single part of government, like every single public service, HMRC seems to be seriously under-resourced. Of course, there are those who will say that HMRC is inefficient, that it's not good throwing more money at HMRC, that we need to get the current staff more productive and improve efficiency by shifting towards digital provision of services rather than people on the end of a telephone. We've had years of governments cutting public service budgets and trying to improve the productivity of existing staff. It's just not working. My own view is that the best way to improve productivity for public services would be to have a radical recovery plan, an injection of massive investment, including pay increases for staff. Create a more optimistic culture in these government departments, rather than asking them yet again to do more for less. What is clear is that there is room for improvement in current HMRC customer services. A recent report of the National Audit Office made some damning conclusions about HMRC. It concluded that HMRC's telephone and correspondence services have been falling below the expected service levels for too long, and HMRC has not achieved planned efficiencies. However, before we start blaming HMRC staff, the Audit Office also said, in the face of funding pressures, HMRC has pressed on with attempts to reduce costs despite its poor performance. HMRC and customers have been caught in a declining spiral of service pressures and cuts. So here is an official government body, the Public Spending Watchdog, saying that HMRC is being stretched to the limit, being bled dry. The report notes that 798 years were spent by customers and agents waiting to speak to an advisor last year. And that was only the callers that got through. Only 2/3 of callers got through in this period against a target of 85%. Now, given that small businesses are the biggest source of the tax gap, and failure to take reasonable care is the biggest reason for non-payment, it would seem that there is scope to reduce the tax gap. How many small businesses would have been able to take better care if they could easily access HMRC advisors to guide them? This is one of those situations where cutting spending is such a false economy. Increasing spending by investing in HMRC systems and staff will pay back significantly more than what it costs. Of course, this isn't only unique to HMRC. We need massive investment in our public services and our infrastructure. Instead, we're getting lame, extremely modest policies of trying to extract a little bit more revenue from a crackdown on tax avoidance. While it is clear that there is scope to reduce that tax gap of £36 billion, and this should definitely be done, it's a sham to claim that this is going to be anywhere near enough to make a significant difference to the country's problems. And this is regardless of who wins the election. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.